Hello, everybody. Thank you so much and welcome to True Understanding. Today is going to be a good episode. We're talking to Simon Davis from Purposeful Intent. You may know him from his fantastic posts on LinkedIn and on the road. He is a leader in the industry and extremely passionate about bringing leaders together to connect and share ideas. And we'll be actually tapping into this knowledge to understand what's working and what's not working in the industry and really leveraging some of the awesome conversations that have been across Purposeful Intent and really learning from that so we can understand how we can go forward. I'm Rebecca Corliss and I'm proudly joined by my co-host, Omar Ramirez, and this is True Understanding. All right, Simon, this is great. We're so excited to talk to you. We have been looking forward to this for a long time, really to set the stage in the event there isn't someone who knows you yet from this podcast. Can you give us a little bit of background? Tell us about yourself. And really, I think it would be cool to talk about how you went from technologist to founder of a company that brings people together in real life to share ideas. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Rebecca and Omar, for having me on. I always love talking about the things that we're doing. I think partially because we're doing things very differently and we want to change the perception of how people come together in our industry. I've spent over 20 years now working in, predominantly focused on corporate real estate technologies. So technologies that help large corporations manage their real estate portfolio, starting in the original days of IWMS back in sort of the late 90s, early 2000s in the UK, and then eventually coming over to the US in about 2004, 2005 to help really sell a product that was geared towards corporate occupiers. And over the course of the time I've been in the US, it's been really a very similar model of trying to tie the right technology to the right companies in order to help them improve whatever process that may be, whether it be something, probably from the older realms around lease administration. I still have nightmares when, the SOX rules came out, or the, legacy facilities management technology, right up to sort of more modern technologies. I've been involved with a few startups. So really a whole breadth of experience in the industry, all with that technology focus, and a lot of it focused around what I would call, those knowledge worker-based roles. So certainly, more office space driven than anything else. And my realization has certainly been that with 20 years plus, I've probably attended about at least 200 events. And what blew my mind was, sort of when we really started coming out of COVID, in the fall of 21, I went to 6 events back to back. And what really blew me away was that none of them had fundamentally changed. They were still very much built from the same old recipe of, having, speakers that will come and talk about something, as opposed to having a format where you could bring people together. And given my legacy in the industry and the phenomenal network I've been able to build through my time, what I was hearing from all of the people at every level from the occupier side was, we want to know what other people are doing. Right. We want to know what's working, what isn't working. And the formats really weren't built around that. And so that's really why we set about Purposeful Intent as a mechanism to bring people together. They're really more focused upon the conversation between the attendees as opposed to speakers or panels telling you what they wanted to tell you. So that's really the basis for it.
That's great. So thinking about how it's changed and how to bring the industry something different and having technology be a part of it as it's needed and relevant. And I got to give you a pitch. We at VergeSense, we love Purposeful Intent. We really, really do. And Omar, I know you get to facilitate a bunch of conversations, so it's near and dear to our heart. So
hey,
Simon,
Omar doesn't only get to facilitate; he also gets to perform with DMC, which was
no
one
big
of my
deal.
highlights of last year was definitely seeing that. So
yeah, my brothers were definitely quite jealous about that one. But I think you're right though, Simon. It is breaking away from the formulaic version of getting people together and having conversations has been critical, and I think it is important. And it's what people really want right now, right? They want to know what people are doing. They want to know how they're doing it, and they want to share that information together.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And
that's what we bring. And I think it's sort of, a small format to bring people so they can open up and talk about what they're doing. And frankly, I think still a lot of them not be afraid to be like, I don't know what I'm doing. We don't know what's working. We don't know what we should be doing, and have that open dialogue.
Yeah. And so, Simon, when we were preparing for this conversation, we were thinking, Omar and I were going back and forth. We're like, what should we dig in with Simon? I mean, he facilitates so many conversations on different topics. I mean, he could speak on so many different things. And so what we thought would be really interesting is use our time to put you in a position to be a little bit of a futurist. You hear so much from these conversations, and we want to know from your perspective, what do you think 2023 will be known for? What do you think this will be the year of? If like we've been thinking maybe 2022 was the year of experimentation, maybe that will continue. But what do you think 2023 will be all about?
You know, it's such a funny tee up, Rebecca, because we hadn't prepped this prior, so we'll be very open on that. I actually hope 2023 is about the future. I hope it's about planning, looking forward to, you know, what we should be doing as an industry to move the needle in significant ways. You know, those of you that know me very well will see my daughter is a big part of what I post about. She's a big part of my content. She's my CTO in training. And part of the reason for that is because I like to think about things through her lens, right? She's 6 now. So in 15 years, when she's, you know, 21, coming out of college, whatever college may be by that point, what's her experience going to be? Because I think we need to really guide towards that. We need to think about the next generations as we think about the future of work. And I really hope we've done all of the backward looking. I think there's been way too much of that. I think we all know the equation should be relatively simple, right? Real estate is typically the second largest expense for an organization. And the majority of people, speaking, you know, with a broad brush, want more than anything flexibility in their life. So why those things can't coexist and why they shouldn't coexist, I don't necessarily get. I think a lot of the people looking backwards, it's either because they're used to that and they really want to focus on what's been successful for them in the past, or, as I frequently post about, there's a vested interest in that, right? It's hard to think about the future of work as the head of real estate if the future of work might not involve real estate. And that's sort of, I think, at the macro level, right? That if we think about what is coming next, what should be coming next, you can't help but have a bias based upon your own positioning, right? And I think, you know, that's why we should look a lot further forwards and really try and factor in, you know, what is work going to be like in 10, 15 years time, and what should we be doing in order to bring that forwards. I'm thinking about it already with Purposeful Intent. You know, we're only really started in April of last year, but I firmly believe that within 3 to 5 years, probably the majority of our content is going to be remote, and it's going to be hybrid with a lot less in person for a number of reasons, right? One is the financial obligations of travel. 2, I think as we look to newer generations, they're way more conscious than my generation was about the environment, right? They wouldn't fly across the world or fly across the country the level that we have in the past for those face-to-face meetings. And I think what COVID has done is changed our perspective at a macro level, that those things that we always used to do, you know, you got to be there, you got to see the whites of their eyes and shake their hands, we don't necessarily need to do. And it's actually better for all of us and better for the environment. And when I think about the attendees, I would love to have 5,000 people participate in my event. It's not theoretic, or it's not physically possible. But I think the information we can share, if we start doing that in a more of a hybrid environment, you know, we may come to a position where we have 30 people in a room, but we have, you know, 100, 500 people listening in, because what we're bringing together is incredibly valuable and has a big audience. So, you know, I think that's the approach I hope people start taking, is looking very much at, you know, what's going to come in the next 10 years as opposed to what's going to come in the next 2.
Simon, when you think about that, like that change and that future forward looking, do you see a difference from the conversations, you know, we're having at Purposeful Intent? Do you see a difference in industries or orgs, or the type of orgs that are having these conversations and the conversations they're having about the future, based on, you know, what industry the company is in or what industry that leader is in?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is going to be determined by the culture of the leader. We're already seeing there's no one size fits all, right? It doesn't matter how big your company is, big or small. There are, you know, people I know in companies of 100 people where their leader is very insistent on bringing them back to the office, whether that's the right thing or the wrong thing. We've seen this week, you know, a lot of the things that Citigroup have been talking about, and Jane Fraser particularly, you know, they moved mountains to change the culture of Citigroup from being, you know, in person to being a lot more remote friendly. Now they're, pivoting a little bit because they believe that underperformers need to be back in the office. And, don't get me wrong. I think I'm often painted and certainly by people I probably paint as being anti-office, and I'm not that by any mechanism, right? I believe there's a ton of value for in-person. I just believe that it needs to be, given the name of our company, it needs to be more purposeful and intentional. And that's kind of where the whole aspect of PI came from, was talking to a friend in the industry on the owner side, on the occupier side, who said day one of COVID, pretty much, that the office should be used with a purposeful intent. The space, I think, is an important aspect, but how you use it is going to differ, I think, greatly based upon what the leader's perspective is. There's a lot of fear factors out there. There's a lot of training and learnings that all people have to make in order for this to be a success. But I think the drivers around people wanting flexibility, if I was leading an organization of any size, that's really what I would look at.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's interesting too, because when your point about Citigroup, where they say, like, underperformers need to come back to the office, you're almost turning the office into a form of punishment, and that has a very negative effect on people, right? You're like, oh, well, you have to come back now because you're not performing. I think that's it's an interesting point about the carefulness and like the consideration and the intentionality, right, with that you have to have when you're shaping these plans. And I think people who I think might accuse you of being like anti-office are very binary thinking, where they're like, oh, it's either this or that. Right. But it's not this or that. It's everything, right? I think Caleb Parker says plus, not versus, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as we do move forwards, the cadence should change. There are times when you do really want people to be in that physical space and be around other people. Certainly when you're looking at things like onboarding and mentoring, we've all learned a lot from being around other people, and I think there's tremendous value. Personally, the most value I get is typically being out on the road and meeting people. It's the incidental conversations. John Tapper from Bar Rescue, he used to call it the casual collision, right? It's actually building in spaces, inner space, so that people run into each other and connect. And for me, it's often the downtime from, outside of a formalized meeting where you're chatting and somebody says, hey, you should meet this person, or you should look at this product, or you should think about this. That's where a lot of the real magic does happen. And it's hard to fabricate. And I don't think forcing people in an office 3 days a week is the way to do that. I think there has to be, real value to bringing people together. And I think those sparks will happen. It certainly varies as well based upon the type of industry that you're in and the type of role that you have. It's not a one size fits all. And it's going to vary depending on what you're trying to achieve. And that's, I think, what people need to realize. It's the why, right? Why should I be in a physical space, wherever that may be, at a particular time? How does it help me, right, in terms of what I'm trying to deliver for the company?
If 2023, I like it. It's the year that we're really being future focused. We're thinking further. How does that practically then give us examples of what differs from 2022? Like, are there different activities that workplace leaders are doing in 2022, different strategic conversations that are happening in 2023, different activities that are happening in 2023? Paint us a picture on how this year will be different.
Yeah, I think it does really require that intentionality. When you look at even since Christmas, right? The growth of ChatGPT and people looking at AI and what it can do. I think the majority of people, and I talk to a lot of people that aren't in my industry. I talk to friends who are lawyers and friends in various other roles. I think people have got no idea how that is going to impact their role, right? I look at it, if I'm a lawyer, I'd be pretty concerned about a technology that effectively can absorb, understand hundreds of years of case law and come back and give me a better written opinion than I could do if it took me 3 weeks, right? And I think that's the level that people need to start thinking about, is how are these technologies going to impact what jobs are going to look like in the future, right? And then what is the knock on in terms of what should we be looking at for supporting those? One of our ambassadors at PI, Chris Moller, he's doing a lot of work right now that really is looking at the parallels between education and work. And I think that's a great area to look at, right? What does the future of education look like? Because to me, it's not bricks and mortar and people paying hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's giving people a much wider, expansive, global look at, experts in their field to learn more and to be more immersive. And this, I think, will take a lot of intentionality. You have to sit down, plan time, bring in the right types of people to really focus on this, right? It's not a simple case of saying, should we renew our lease that's going to expire in 18 months because we only have a 30% utilization? Those metrics should be pretty easy. It's really looking at what are we going to be as a company in 10 years time? And how does that impact what real estate or workplace or work really is for the organization?
Simon, do you think then that the biggest challenge for workplace leaders, like as an aggregate group like this year, is adapting to change and adapting to technology? Because it seems like we're getting hit on all sides by, we were hit by the change of the pandemic. We were hit by the change of economic, stability. So now we're once again potentially in a recession this year. And then you have technologies, like new technologies being developed every day. And then you have on the property technology side, but you also have these new technologies like AI and things of that nature that could affect our roles as well. Like, how do you think the combination of all these different things, like mostly based in technology, are going to be the biggest challenge that the workplace leaders are going to have to deal with, and like understanding and learning and changing with those things?
I think the biggest challenge workplaces have is, candidly, they have way too much on their plate. They're very undervalued in terms of the structure. I thought COVID would give us more of a seat at the C-suite table. Frankly, to me, what COVID has done, it's got a lot of very informed, highly paid, highly titled people now telling workplace people what they should do with zero bearing for that. All the mandates that are coming in, I can't imagine that there is a workplace leader out there who is mandating that people should be coming in the office at any periodicity, right? It's all coming from the top and from people that don't have the right level of information. And I think people as well that frankly have an older style view of what a company should be and what it means to be a corporate, and potentially some that have a vested interest in, the workplace and the community around it getting back to what it used to be, right? There's a lot of money flows through those walls at various different levels. So I think, that's one of the biggest challenges that workplace leaders have. And then couple that with all of the other things that are hitting us. When I do work just around something as outwardly simple as sensors, right? There's probably 30 sensor manufacturers on the market with any real credibility. They're all incredibly different. They have very different use cases, different benefits, cost propositions, security aspects, etc. How am I, as a workplace leader who is fighting with my CEO as to whether we should bring people back or not, who is trying to determine where we should have space, who's also trying to determine every aspect of the look, feel of the space, how am I going to have the time to dedicate to make sure I make that right decision? So for me, I think one of the things we need to do is we need to look at more roles that are very specific around that future of work and around the future of technology as an adjunct to workplace and real estate leaders, somebody who is actually having the time to concentrate and focus on those aspects, because otherwise it really is going to be incredibly slow moving. And I think companies may end up making the wrong decisions on investments by not having the time to really focus on it and being pressured from the top to do something.
Oh, that's interesting. And so tell us more on what you think those roles will be.
I firmly see that the corporate real estate side, which is my background, is only a small part of the future. When we look at and actually some of the events that we're bringing up, our Boston event, a big focus on that is going to be in hospitality, because hospitality can play a massive part in magnetizing the workplace and encouraging people to be back at the right place. Logical ones that we tie in, technology and finance, but probably the biggest one when you look at future of work, and the biggest, I think, crossover point is HR. I went to a future work conference in London last year, and there were 180 speakers, and one of them had a real estate title. It was really more HR focused. And I think there needs to be a meeting of those minds in order to really determine, what the future of work should be for organizations, because there's a ton of work around policy that also needs to be done, to ensure that we have that effectiveness. But I think, there are companies out there with future of work titles, and I think we'll see more and more of that. But I think we also need to make sure that they are not just solo focused on any one of those aspects I mentioned. They really need to be, cross-dimensional, and have their feet in those different camps of hospitality, workplace, real estate, IT, HR. It will be a phenomenal role. I think it will be a blast for people that get it. It will be challenging because you're going to have a ton of stakeholders, but I think there needs to be that visibility in organizations as they look to the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that the kind of cross functionality of the role is an interesting aspect that has come more and more into play. In that, we used to run into this situation internally all the time where you'd have the like head of IT and the head of workplace and the corporate real estate manager and and the people manager, and like everyone be like, well, it's not my budget, or it's not my this is not my section, so like I'm going to step out of this process because I have too many other things on my plate already. But I think now those teams are being kind of forced to work together more often. And because of that, there has to be this cross-functional dialogue and cross-functional sharing that's happening. And without the proper like channels to do that, it becomes very difficult. And that you don't want it to become combative. You want to be able to bring those teams together, and you need someone who's helping to kind of shepherd that process, right? And I think that's kind of what you're touching at, is a little bit of all these teams probably sounds cross-functional.
It probably sounds more competitive, but I think you do need some kind of a referee. Maggie Thatcher, when she was Prime Minister of the UK, she'd use the term first among equals, right? And I think you need a bit of that, because I would always counsel people back in my not too distant past about every time we did an implementation of a technology, didn't matter what it was, one of the most important meetings to have up front was to get the technology group in. So get actually corporate IT in to talk about what we're doing, why we're doing it, integrations, etc. And without fail, every single time you had that meeting, there'd be somebody from the IT function, the corporate IT function, who'd say, you know what, we could just build this, right? And look how successful that was when people actually did believe that, right? I remember presenting a full IWMS solution to a Fortune 100 client at the time, and their head of technology internally was convinced they could build it. And I'm like, you're crazy. Like, these programs have probably cost $5-10 million of investment over 3 years, and you think you can build it? And I think that's why they do need to have a role that has, significant weight to it in order to make sure that things do move in the right direction.
So sounds like more C-suite attention, more collaboration needed for across these stakeholders, new roles that will be developed. So now talk to us about what needs to be learned in 2023. I mean, you're facilitating so much learning across the industry. What are going to be some of the core lessons and skills that people should really focus on acquiring to be successful this year and in the future?
Yeah, I think if you look at it from the sort of macro level of a corporation, I think people need to better understand things like, how do we manage remotely? How do we onboard? How do we do these things in different ways, right? Again, not saying that there's only one way to do it, but we need to understand the benefits of doing things in different spaces. So, that sort of binary conversation, people are saying, oh, you can't manage remotely, you can't onboard remotely. It's not true. You just don't know how to do it. It might not always be the right determination and the right way to do it, but you need to learn those types of skills. And I think as well, there's a lot of conversation about asynchronous work and how people can better deliver by almost being able to work as a corporation on a 24/7 basis. Again, a lot of value to that, but people need to learn how to do it. And corporations, in my mind, need to put in guidelines about how we can actually work flexibly. Right? It can't be a free for all. It can't be everybody decides what they do at whatever point. There needs to be some substance behind it. So you have, let's say, I hate the term, but you have a core working period where you are expected to be available, but it doesn't need to be 8 hours a day, and it doesn't need to be 5 days a week. So I think you need to put those guidelines in place. And the structure, should be related to the value. It shouldn't just be an arbitrary decision point. I have a big fear factor going forwards that I think there are organizations that I've come across that pre-pandemic were, 100% in office, and going back 10, 15, 20 years, that's always been the case. Because of the pandemic, they now have remote models. And guess what? The easiest thing to do is say, don't come in 3 days a week. So everyone comes in Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. At some point, somebody is going to turn around and say, you know what? This just isn't working. We haven't saved any money. And they're going to try and bring people back in 5 days a week. That's the point when you really will see, in my mind, a significant resignation of people. Giving people the flexibility that many of them have always wanted, especially when you consider, families and people with, caring for elder relatives and just all the nuances of being a human being, right? You give people that flexibility and then you suddenly take it away. That's when you'll see people, I think, en masse start leaving organizations. So I think companies need to look at these skills and work out, how do we look at the right type of cost proposition for our portfolio, but also how do we train our employees to manage in these different ways? A lot of the fear factor and the pushback is from middle management, people that are used to managing by sight, and they have a natural fear of, well, what happens if we don't bring people back in the office? Like, what happens to me? What happens to my role? Mm-hmm. And those difficult decisions need to be had, and they're hard. You run workplace at an organization for a period of time. You know everybody from, security to catering to, office managers to all of the staff. And all of a sudden, if you say, as a company that I've done some work with recently, they looked at their portfolio. They saw that of 9 of their 12 offices were only 2% utilized. So they did the right thing. They got out of all the space. They're moving to more of a fully remote company. But they're cognizant of the fact that means that, there are people going to be losing jobs because we no longer have that physical side. And it's difficult conversations, but I think it's things that need to happen in order for us to move forward. And frankly, look at it from a purely bottom dollar value, right? If you want to retain and attract the best people, you need to have flexibility as a core stream in your offering.
Yeah, I think Simon is like the workplace quote unquote person in the room. I think it's important for people who work in workplace, right? Like in these different types of roles, like FM, CRE, like the different parts of the workplace org, to understand like what is coming and what changes are happening in the market, and to like think about upskilling yourself and how you can future-proof your own skill sets, right? Because those skill sets that you need to learn for the future are not the same skill sets you had 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 20 years ago. They're new skill sets. And I think, that's kind of what you're tapping on there too, is a little bit like, this change might be coming. And in my mind, I'm like, okay, how can we help people prepare for that and help them learn these new skill sets and help them adapt so that, when that, let's say some company does close their office and you're an FM without a job, like, or a workplace person without a job, like what skill sets do you need in order to get that next job or that new advanced role or that different role? Like, what is that? Like, how is that working? So that's where my mind goes to, at least when I hear you talking about this change that's coming, because it is happening already and it is going to continue into this year as people start, looking towards the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, there's always the echo chamber danger, right? Of who you surround yourself with. I start looking a lot more at the companies that are starting to really grow, right? 2-year-old companies that have never had physical presence. They've always been fully remote because they came out of the pandemic. If you're a founder, of an organization, at some point you're going to get to that level where traditionally it's been, all right, I need space. And for a lot of people, it was, I need space in Silicon Valley because it's more of an ego thing. That doesn't happen anymore, right? I think founders will invest in real estate way later in their genesis than ever before. I had drinks with a friend of mine around the Christmas period, and he started working for a petrochemical supplier, 1,200 employees that came to pass sort of just before the pandemic. And I actually met with their just socially met with their CEO, but he said, I have no intention of ever having any physical real estate. I'm going to take the money I would save, and every quarter I'm going to take my entire team somewhere globally to build our culture and interact. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the other part that we're not seeing, because we do have a lens around the built environment that is going to really impact, and that people again have to start thinking about how will that impact their organization.
So I do want to represent the other side, if there are sides, for those companies. I know, right? You want to be fair, but for those companies who are seeing evidence that that workplace is having an important role and they're seeing success and they're dedicated, and to think of those real estate and workplace leaders that are helping facilitate that, knowing that even they need to change and adapt, even adaptation is necessary there. What new skills or practices do you think they must take as they think about the workplace in order to make sure that evolution is happening too?
Yeah, it's a great question, Rebecca. And again, I'm certainly not an anti-office person. I just believe, it needs to be used at the right point. And I think some of those things we touched on, around things like hospitality, around things like technology, HR policies, they're skills that people need to learn. The easiest way to keep yourself employed is to make sure that what you're delivering is having the impact it needs to. Omar was with us. We went to Salesforce for our last event in December. Their hospitality, their events people were unbelievable. Mm-hmm. I would go in maybe not every day, but I'd go in many days just to be around that level of service, that level of quality of individual, right? Because and that's why we're starting off this year with PI with two things. One is that we're doing an event down in Sydney. We're talking about how do you consumerize and contextualize the experience, right? The theory being you have so much data from a consumer basis about what you like with your Spotify Wrapped and your Netflix preferences. Why don't we have that around people so that they can better determine when they should be coming into the office and what draws people in? So that's one aspect of it, right? Using data to determine those things. The other aspect is, as I mentioned in Boston, is the hospitality side, right? What things really bring people back? Nice coffee and all of those things are table stakes. You need to really, I think, look, as Omar and I have talked about in the past, at the experiential side of what really does bring people back. That's the lens that I would look at it, right? Is really, the workplace as a meeting point for innovation, creativity, and success. How do you embody that within your own physical space? What do you do, obviously, within the parameters of what you can do, within your organization?
Yeah, and the hospitality point is very valid, Simon. We've actually had a few different guests on who have talked about this idea of the friction points, right? Like by creating a great experience in which you're pinpointing at Salesforce, right? Everything is considered, so everything is taken care of in some ways. So like they're not really having like negative experiences, and those friction points that might block you from having a good experience would make you less likely to come in again. So if you're only coming into the office once and this is your first time coming in, and like you hit traffic on your way in, it's already a bad experience, but we can't control traffic, right? But then you come into the office and there's no coffee, there's no water, your badge doesn't work, you can't get through security, right. There's no conference rooms available. If you hit these friction points and they're not considered, then you're less likely to want to come back again. So that hospitality mindset is something that considers everything. And I think it's a really good point for people to, I think, hold on to, is the idea that the more friction you can reduce and the better experience you can produce over time, the more likely people are to come back to that same great experience and want to come back.
Yeah, and I think as well that the view that it differs so differently for individuals, right? I love equating. Like the keynote speaker we have coming to Boston, he started off, he did his culinary apprenticeship at the French Laundry. He's also advised Justin Timberlake on a 1923 club in Nashville. He also does a ton of work with Virgin Cruises, right? And the reason that he resonated with me is because when I travel, if I'm traveling with my family, I'll always go back to the hotels where they've given my daughter an incredible experience, right? Now, for somebody else, they might not want any of those things. In fact, some of them might, say, what, I want an adults only resort because I don't want to be around kids. And I think the contextualization of who you are as an individual tied to the experiential side with, the hospitality components put on. And the other point you make, which I think is really resonant, it doesn't have to be, having Lizzo come and perform every week. It can be simple hospitality things, like the security guard knows your name and greets you. As you mentioned, Omar, your badge works consistently, right? Just things that make it frictionless to be in a place. So,
well, I'm going to make an official request that Lizzo performs every week, or we at least have her as a guest on this show, because that would be an absolute delight. And I love your taste. Nicely done, Simon.
PI 2024. That's we'll look at bringing Lizzo to one of our events.
I hope Omar gets to perform with her as well, similar to his performance I know he had in the past.
I could absolutely not. I would lose my mind. Lizzo is fantastic.
You've got a year and a half to prep, probably, Omar.
I believe in you, Omar.
Dance moves.
I want to, jokes aside, there's something you said there, Omar, Simon. There's something you said there, Simon, that I thought was very interesting, and it's the contextual piece. And I just want to go a little bit further. I love this vision that you're painting in terms of this contextualized experience for the employee. I think that's so cool. What will be needed? What is needed and what will be needed as we evolve to make that reality possible? Because that's an amazing picture you're painting.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes down to difficult things. It's data. It's the right kind of data. It's technology that can take that information and, again, make those things seamless. So really the ability, for example, for a system to proactively notify you when they see through your, Slack communications that you're at an impasse, that you should be coming into space. And by the way, based upon what we know about you, this is the right kind of space because, you know, Rebecca likes open light and Omar likes a quiet corner. And also, you know, and this one's a little bit flippant, but true. It's, you know, it's Taco Tuesday and Simon likes tacos. So we've already booked you this meeting room on a Tuesday, you know, and I think having something that can give you the prompting that you might not necessarily be thinking about is a big one. And really, I think just that experiential side of knowing those things about individuals and teams and actually helping build the culture as well. Right. I think the beauty for me of COVID, twofold, personally, was being home so much with my family. And secondly, was we know so much more about people now than we ever used to know. Right. I saw yesterday, I can't remember the name of the company, but a great post that was shared by a CEO, you know, who was talking a lot about how they are enabling remote work. And, you know, they start their calls with some more personal sort of social type conversations. Right. We don't always have that. And knowing, you know, who else in your building likes Lizzo or likes a particular thing that you like can help build those human connections. I think factoring those human characteristics into the decision making is going to be a big driver, right? I certainly grew up in an environment where my best friends in my life have come to me through work, right? Those things do happen and they still happen. And there are people that you would be excited to go in to see at work, right? And I think that human aspect can help be that draw, but I think it does need to be underpinned by the right data and the right tech. You know, it has to be a technology that can do some of these things seamlessly. I think right now, you know, the companies that are doing that, and I would certainly showcase our hosts in Boston as one of those. They're taking probably 3 or 4 different types of tech and melding them together to give the right experience to their employees. I think whoever can do that at a application level and can do it and also adhere to security requirements of large financial institutions will be a big winner coming out of this.
Awesome. And Simon, so a question for you, all this like future thinking, forward thinking, things we can make progress on, things we want to make progress on, and that people are starting to make progress on. What do you think could get in the way of that? What could block us in 2023? Or what, like, you know, whether attitudes, you know, culture, the markets.
Yeah, I mean, outside of I think external influences, you know, the economy is something we can't necessarily control. I think human nature is the biggest blocker. You know, if you think back to the work that Duncan Wardle has done with us several times, and for those that don't know, Duncan was the former head of creativity at Disney. You know, his big thing is that when you are given a suggestion, you should say yes and, meaning, okay, I agree with what you're saying. What else should we do? And too many people are more around, you know, that they either the straight no or they want to give you their opinion instead. And I think those blockers, you know, are natural blocker because there are generally more reasons why we shouldn't do something than we should, especially when it comes to employment and the workplace. You know, I think that's the biggest block. It's people not wanting to embrace it or just really looking at still thinking 2-3 years down the line, right? I get it. You can't necessarily spend all of your days looking out the window thinking what life is going to be about in 2040. But you need to have some time doing that, you know, I think to prepare for the future.
Yeah, it makes sense. That open mindset by nature, it's going to be more curious. It's going to be more explorative. It's going to be open and wonder what could be. And so if you can, even if you feel like, oh my goodness, I don't know, if you have an open mindset, that's going to create more sense of possibility.
Absolutely.
So Simon,
it really is.
That's great. And then, so Simon, we want to put you in a position to give us one last piece of advice, give the listeners one last piece of advice. What would you recommend that one priority or one task or one action that everyone should take to make sure 2023 is the strongest possible year for workplace yet?
Yeah, I'll probably go with more than one, but I mean, we've covered a couple of them, but I think be open, be willing to listen, learn, be willing to consider new ideas, go out there, right? Meet people. The best side professionally for COVID has been how I've been able to grow my network remotely. Prior to COVID, I would generally not accept a LinkedIn invitation unless I'd met somebody physically in person. Now it's the other way around. Now I'm super excited that Dave Kearns is coming to Boston, and you know, one word of advice, if you don't follow Dave Cairns, there's a word of advice, follow that guy. But I think, I think be open, it's hard, right? I have a 6-year-old, but one of the things that I'm really focusing on this year is building time to read. And I'm loving the fact that I'm going back to, read other people's views and perspectives, ask your peers for recommendations on, things they've read or done or seen or podcasts they've heard like this one that have helped inspire them. I think our mission at PI is really twofold. One is to inspire and one is to inform. And I think by looking at those things professionally, everybody benefits, right? But you have to sometimes lift your head above the mire and really, be conscious about doing those particular doing those particular activities. Whether it be reading, listening, just speaking to somebody. And I think that for me is one of the beauties of what we do. There's a ton of people out there with a ton of varied opinions. So, listen to them and see what can help you evolve as an individual and within your corporation.
That's awesome. I love that. And those new opinions could actually inspire an idea that's even better. You never know. Well, Simon, this
Absolutely.
has been awesome. Thank you so much. We have had a lot of fun. We were really excited when we knew we had the opportunity to talk to you live. And I think this is actually exceeding my expectations and really seeing what the future could be. And I think your daughter would be proud. She would be proud of what you're really encouraging the space to be. I think it's going to be an even better world when she's working herself. So that's great. So thank you, Simon. We appreciate it.
No, it's been fun. I really, really enjoy it. So thank you. Thanks for the time and the opportunity. And I will say, I do want to thank VergeSense for being such a big supporter of what we're doing at Purposeful Intent. And Omar, has been an incredible facilitator / questionnaire / performer for us. So we're hoping to see more of him in 23 as well. So.
Hey there, this is Omar Ramirez, co-host of the True Understanding podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave us a 5-star review to help us expand our reach and grow our community of workplace leaders. If you'd like to suggest a topic or guest, please drop us a line at trueunderstanding.vergesense.com. The True Understanding podcast is created by VergeSense. Over 130 global companies rely on VergeSense for a true understanding of how their workplaces are used, so they can continuously and confidently optimize spaces to reduce costs and improve employee experiences.